We should be going live here in just a moment. Nice to be with all of you once again, especially since we're going to be talking about what is, for me, the most important series of videos we have going on this channel. And that is the pre-Christian evidence that Jesus is the biblical Messiah. CWJah Talk 45. We're going to be reviewing Malachi chapter 3, verses 1 through 3, to try and see just how those texts can be used to show that Jesus is the biblical Messiah. How does Malachi 3, 1 through 3 provide us with pre-Christian evidence that we can use to show other people, like the Jews, that Jesus was foretold as the Messiah, that the Messiah that is foretold in the pre-Christian texts that the Jews held sacred and still do hold sacred in many respects today, that those texts before Jesus was even born, even known on this earth as the man Jesus, talk about things that are uniquely fulfilled in him that don't have application to anybody else since the time those texts were written or since Jesus was here on the earth. Nobody, specifically in the case of Malachi 3, 1 through 3, nobody fulfills those texts the way Jesus does, to the extent that I believe I can show that Jesus does, and that another individual presented in the New Testament in association with Jesus, John the Baptist, fulfills in a role relative to Jesus. And so why do we say it's pre-Christian evidence, Malachi 3, 1 through 3? Well, that's because the book of Malachi has manuscript evidence dated to a time well before Jesus was born. We have in the Dead Sea Scroll text of 4Q76, the text of Malachi that we're going to read tonight, Malachi 3, 1 through 3, dated to between 150 and 125 BCE, which is well over 100, close to 200 years before Jesus began his ministry and started to do things that were considered fulfillment of texts like Malachi. Good to see all of you this evening. Betsy, hello. GL, pink moon. Whenever there's a pink moon, sometimes we get purple rain. We'll see. Not always, sometimes. And of course, Everett Commodore. So, and of course, welcome to anyone else who's joining us and who joins us during the live stream or who watches afterwards. We like to do live streams as often as we can here so that people can contribute in the chat. And it just gives us an opportunity to talk to each other a little bit, more so than, of course, through just the comments in uploaded videos. We try to do live streams at least once a week. Right now, I'm focusing on this series of videos, the pre-Christian evidence that Jesus is the biblical Messiah, and the Bible and the Trinity in conflict videos. We've done several of those recently, and many issues related to the Trinity will come up this evening, and I think be effectively addressed. We've proven not only that there is pre-Christian evidence Jesus is the biblical Messiah, but the Bible and the Trinity are in absolute conflict. And it really results from a failure of later Christian theology, specifically under pagan Roman Emperor Constantine and a bunch of false teachers and liars who got together and who changed the metaphysic of the biblical one God, actually presented a different understanding of the one God of the Bible's nature and his relationship to his Son, and of course later the Holy Spirit. So it's a tragedy, to say the least, how many people have been confused and misled by the doctrine of the Trinity. What we do here is we just point to the biblical text. We use the biblical evidence. We don't go beyond it. We don't add to it. We don't change it. And we interpret it within the context of the biblical texts. We don't go outside of it, grab an understanding that's hundreds of years after all the biblical texts that are accepted as part of the Bible were written, and say, oh, that's what they meant. No, they tell us what they meant, and in pretty clear terms as well. So the same is true when it comes to the Messiah and the things that were foretold as early as the book of Genesis. Genesis 3:15, a text that we considered earlier in this series that talked about a seed, a promised seed, whom God foretold would come and bring an end to the serpent, the wicked one, that confused, deceived, and lied to our first human parents, bringing sin and death into the world. But we believe through faith in the Messiah, Jesus Christ, we can have life through his sacrifice and by faith in his name. So I've talked about how Malachi 3:1-3 is preserved for us in texts almost 200 years before Jesus started to proclaim himself as the Messiah in 4Q76. The text is basically the same as we have represented in the Masoretic tradition and in the Greek Septuagint tradition. There's just one difference in one part that I ultimately don't think makes much difference. Well, let's go ahead and bring up Malachi chapter 3. And we're going to read verses 1-3 in the NWT, a Bible published by Jehovah's Witnesses, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. And I have a whole nother series going on right now that documents the superiority, morally and translationally, of the NWT. I don't care what these ridiculous apologetic nuts have to say or have said unless they really are bringing forth credible arguments, as sometimes they do, but very infrequently compared to the arguments they bring forth, which are not persuasive. They're not based on the best available evidence. And of course, a lot of Watchtower haters and others are out there repeating a lot of these terrible arguments, misrepresenting the NWT because they hate all things Watchtower. I don't care. I'm not interested in any of that stuff. We've called your bluff. You really don't have much to persuade us of anything other than what I said before. The NWT is morally and translationally superior to most, if not all, English Bibles published to date. And the use of the divine name alone propels it far ahead of most translations, both in the Old Testament and in the New, even though, of course, I don't accept every use of the divine name in the New Testament that's not based on an actual quotation of the divine name from the Old Testament. It still represents the divine name where it should be in the New Testament because of those quotations of the Old Testament far more than any other English Bible published to date. That's just one example. You can take a look at the series of videos I have going on right now for more. I have a lot more. I've written books. I've done debates. I've wrote articles. I've got tons of videos that discuss, not only in that series about the NWT being morally and translationally superior, but videos, articles, and books outside of that series that also take a close look and prove what we're showing in that series of videos and what I will continue to show, even as I also make clear where the NWT is not correct, which isn't very often in comparison to how correct it is when you look at other English Bible translations. The NWT is superior. That doesn't mean it's perfect, doesn't mean it gets everything right. Okay, we're not blinded by the light. We see things clearly here. And we represent what we can show is based on the best available evidence. That's it, right? Anything else, if it's based on your doctrinal persuasion pro or against Watchtower, we're not interested. We want the best available reasons. We want real evidence and facts properly presented, or you can save it. Keep it to yourself. Malachi chapter 3, verses 1 through 3. Let's take a look. Here in the NWT it states, "Look, I am sending my messenger, and he must clear up a way before me." This is Jehovah talking, the God of the Old Testament. You will be able to see if you look at the context here. Although, as we've discussed frequently, and as I've shown in videos, including one playing on this channel's front page right now, really it's the angels of Jaho who are speaking for him. And often I believe it's his firstborn son, Jesus, as the angel of Jaho, as Michael the archangel, but also other angels, as we read in Acts chapter 7, the plural used there to show they were there speaking in the burning bush, talking to Moses on the mountain, giving him the law, and in many other contexts. And we're told, as we're going to read later on, no one has heard God's voice, God the Father, the only God, as I'm going to show, and as I've shown in many other videos, the only true God, right? The sons of God are gods. But that does not make him the one God in the ultimate sense that the Father is God. But the angels, his sons, not his rebellious ones, speak for and represent him. And we have the same thing in the book of Revelation, chapter 22, where it specifically says, John addresses the angel that tells him all these things, including speaking for both Jesus and God, because it's God in Revelation 1:1 who gives the revelation to Jesus, who in turn gives it to his angel because he's the ruler of the angels. What do angels do? They present messages from other people. God never does that. Not one single time does he deliver a message from somebody else to somebody else. Yet in Revelation 1:1, not only is the divine, heavenly, resurrected Spirit Jesus given information he didn't have, he then communicates that information to his angel, because he's the ruler of the angels, the chief angel, Michael. Whether you believe that or not is not really necessary. He's certainly an archangel. 1 Thessalonians 4:16 makes that plain and clear. It's the voice of an archangel or the archangel in that context. It's an archangel's voice. It belongs to an archangel. And in that context, the one they're talking about is Jesus, descending from heaven and raising the dead with his voice, just like he said he would do in John chapter 5. We're going to talk more about this role of an angel and Jesus as an angel, because that's how he's described, not only in the text that I've mentioned, but also in Isaiah 9:5-6 in the Septuagint. It translates mighty God with angel of great counsel. We did a whole nother video on it in this series. I did a whole video on the sons of God as gods in the book of Psalms and in other texts, often which is often translated angel, like in Psalm 8:5. You made him being humankind, lower than gods, Elohim. And in Hebrews 2:7-9, it quotes the Septuagint, which translates Elohim as angels, because the sons of God are gods. God says it, Psalm 82:6, and Jesus says it, quoting God, John 10:34-36. Now let's take a look at Malachi 3:1-3. And we'll discuss this further about how Jesus is again called an angel, a specific type of angel, and so is somebody else. Remember, humans can be angels. Spirits who deliver messages are angels. Angel is a functional term. It means you deliver a message to somebody else for somebody else. Malachi 3:1. Look, I'm sending my messenger. And there's the first instance of angel. And he must clear up a way before me. This is Jehovah talking, but really an angel talking, because again, as I'm going to show, nobody has heard God's voice at any time or seen his figure. but there's one who has explained him, and other angels have spoken for him and represented him. It's what they do. And suddenly there will come to his temple and NWT puts true here. We'll get to that more in a moment. The true Lord, whom you people are seeking, and the messenger of the covenant, in whom you are delighting. There's the second reference to an angel. Again, we're not going to get into whether it's a human or a spirit yet. We will in a moment, though. We've got the first messenger clearing up a way before me. Jehovah's talking, but again, I believe he's using angels all the time. Sons of God are always talking for their Father. We'll get to it more in a moment. And then we have this Lord, what the NWT describes as the true Lord, coming to his temple, whom the people are seeking, and the messenger of the covenant in whom you are delighting. Look, he will certainly come, Jehovah of armies has said. So to me, and I'll get to it more in a moment, this second part is describing one individual. It's possible that it's talking about two individuals. And I believe that when we go to the New Testament, it's obvious that this first messenger and this Lord indicate two individuals. But once we get to this Lord whom you are seeking and the messenger of the covenant in whom you are delighting, then it says he will certainly come. And I believe that he, even though at times you can have a singular pronoun as a reference to one subject of multiple subjects presented. So again, this is an absolute. I'm just telling you my interpretation, which I'll justify further in a moment. This he refers to both the Lord and the messenger of the covenant. I believe those are both the same individual. Now, in the 4Q76 text that I mentioned, there's a difference in verse 2. One part that is significant, and that is right here. It says, but who will put up with the day of his coming? In the 4Q76 text of Malachi, it says, but who can endure them? So it uses a plural here versus the singular, who will put up with the day of his coming? Who can endure them? 4Q76. But again, we know we have at least two individuals if we look at the text of verse 1 completely, because we have the messenger clearing up a way before Jehovah, and then the Lord, whom I believe is also this messenger of the covenant. So there's no question, it's certainly not from the New Testament perspective, we have two individuals here. I just don't believe we have two individuals right here, from the Lord to the messenger of the covenant. Obviously, I believe this is John the Baptist, which we'll get to more in a moment. So in 4Q76 in verse 2, when it says, who can endure them, versus who will be putting up with the day of his coming, I believe that 4Q76 is using them, the plural pronoun, as a reference to both. I'm sending my messenger, the one who clears up a way before CWJah. That's John the Baptist, as I'm going to show in a moment from the New Testament perspective. And this Lord, whom I believe is also the angel of the covenant. So that's what I believe 4Q76 in verse 2 is referring to when it says them. The messenger clearing up the way, and the Lord, who is also the angel of the covenant. That's the them. It could be a reference to the Lord and the messenger of the covenant if you take messenger of the covenant as the same messenger that clears up a way before that Lord, or before Jehovah, which we'll talk about more in a moment. But I'm going to show that really in the New Testament, John is never presented as a messenger of the covenant. Jesus is. And he's presented as the Lord, whom God made Lord and exalted as Lord, and who was always Lord in some sense, similar to how the angels are often called Lord, which we'll get to in a moment. Let's read the rest of the text. But who will put up with the day of his coming? And who will be the one standing when he appears? For he will be like fire of a refiner and like the lye of laundrymen. And he must sit as a refiner, verse 3, and cleanser of silver, and he must cleanse the sons of Levi, and he must clarify them like gold and silver, and they will certainly become to Jehovah, people presenting a gift offering in righteousness. So we're going to break this down. We're going to talk about what does it mean to prepare a way before Jehovah? Who is the messenger that does that? Who's this Lord, angel of the covenant? What is this refining by fire? Cleanser and cleansing like silver and presenting people as a gift offering in righteousness? I believe the New Testament uniquely presents all of that in fulfillment of Jesus in a way that, like I said at the start of this video, is nowhere near anyone throughout history, either before or since Jesus. There's no one. There's no story. There's nothing that comes anywhere near what we have in the New Testament presented to us as the fulfillment of those texts. So let's talk about Malachi 3:1 again. And this preparing the way before me. Now, in this series of videos, pre-Christian evidence that Jesus is the biblical Messiah, I've talked about, for example, Isaiah 7:14, how Jesus fulfills that text and other texts in Isaiah chapter 7 and all the way through chapter 9, 7, 8, and 9, right? They're all messianic in some parts that uniquely apply to Jesus. And we talked about how Emmanuel, from Isaiah 7:14, meaning God with us, was fulfilled in Jesus in explicit descriptions given by Jesus, one of which is John 14, 9, and 10. Right? Trinitarians love to just say, he's Emmanuel, God with us. So he's God. God was with us. Is that what that means? Well, what does the Bible say? What does Jesus, the one they say is God with us, God in the Trinitarian sense that they believe in God, right? Not the biblical sense. We've talked about it. When Trinitarians say God, they either mean the Trinity or a person of God. Neither one of those understandings are articulated anywhere in the Bible. That's what comes later, and they read it back into the Bible. But they use the word God, which confuses people, right? Because that's in the Bible. But their understanding is not. And that's where they fail, right? That's where their tradition blinds them to understanding the Word of God. John 14, 9, and 10. So how is Jesus Emmanuel? How is he God with us? How does John, as I'm going to show in a moment, John the Baptist, prepare the way of Jehovah? And that way of Jehovah is shown to be the coming of Jesus, and Jesus not Jehovah. Well, just look at what he says. Jesus said to him, talking to Philip, have I been with you men so long a time, right? And you don't get it. I've been with you this long and you still don't understand. It's like talking to the Trinitarians. Trinitarians, have we quoted the text to you this long and you still don't understand? It's incredible. And you still have not come to know me, right? Who is he, Trinitarians? Do you understand? Are you listening to the Messiah, or are you listening to a pagan emperor and a bunch of false teachers and liars headed by Athanasius who completely transformed the metaphysic in terms of the relationship between God and his Son after the Bible was written? He that has seen me has seen the Father. How is it you say, show us the Father? How is God with us? How does John prepare the way for Jehovah, and yet it's Jesus? Do you not believe I am in union or in the Father, and the Father is in or in union with me? The things I say to you men, what I'm telling you, what comes out of my mouth, I do not speak of my own originality. It's not me. He's telling us here plainly, in the plainest language, and even saying, look, you still don't get it? And I'm going to show you texts before this account that show you they should have gotten it. Just like the Trinitarians should get it. But they don't. The Father who remains in union or in me is doing his works. Okay, so they're not Jesus' works. The things he's saying are not Jesus' words. Whose words, whose works are they? They're the Father's. Nobody disputes that the Father is Jehovah or Jah. Nobody who interprets the biblical text, not Trinitarians, not non-Trinitarians, nobody. Everybody agrees the Father is Jehovah, Jaho. So when Malachi 3:1 says, I am sending my messenger, and it's Jehovah talking, even if it's an angel talking for him, he's talking the words of the Father, just like Jesus is, right? An angel. Trinitarians, an angel. You understand, right? You give us so much grief, and you really do. You blaspheme us and Jesus and angels, right? You go after everybody because your false doctrine makes you so insecure about identifying him as an angel, even just functionally. And yet you do that when it comes to the angel of Jehovah, CWJah, in the Old Testament. You turn right around and claim that that's actually another person of the Trinity. So it gets so ridiculous when you actually spend some time with Trinitarians because they can't get their doctrine into the Bible in any sensible fashion, contradict themselves all over the place, and just claim they don't, right? Oh, no, that's not a contradiction. He's not an angel. He's an angel. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a contradiction. You have a special category of angel? Well, why don't you just say that he's Michael or he's the archangel then, since the archangel would be ruler of the angels, even the angel of Jaho, if that's not the archangel, and just say that that's an uncreated angel. Something the Bible never says, by the way. You just make that up because you can't deny the teaching of Paul and others that Jesus was that angel in the Old Testament leading God's people, the angel in whom God put his name, just like Jesus is given the name, right? This is all consistent. It can all be interpreted and make sense in the context of the Bible. We don't need all this later stuff that you guys embrace and reject the Bible. It couldn't be any more clear than these texts right here. If these were the only texts that told us Jesus' relationship to the Father and identified Jesus as the one that John paved the way for, I don't understand how anybody could fail to recognize how Jesus represents his Father. His Father's actually with him right now, talking through him, doing works through him. It's the Father. So what is the confusion, Trinitarians, that you don't understand how God is with us? Is he not telling you right here? If he's telling you, I'm not talking, these words you're hearing out of my mouth, that's not my words. Well, if they're not his words, whose words are they? He's telling you right here, if they're not his works, whose works are they, Trinitarians? The Father, Jehovah, the one that the messenger, John the Baptist, will show in a moment, prepared the way for. But you can't see Jehovah the Father. Nobody can. Nobody has and nobody will. He comes to us through his sons, just like he did all throughout the Hebrew scriptures, Hebrew Aramaic scriptures, and just like he does in the New Testament. Let's go to another text. John 1:19, it makes the point I just made about how nobody has seen God. right? Nobody has seen God. What we see are his words and his works through his sons. John 1:18. No man has seen God at any time. The only begotten God. Some manuscripts say only begotten Son, but it's the same thing, right? Sons of God are gods. Psalm 82:6, John 10:34 through 36, all throughout the book of Psalms. And in other texts like Deuteronomy, where the sons of God, which is a Hebrew idiom that essentially means they're gods, just like sons of the singers are singers, just like sons of the prophets are prophets, the sons of God are gods. And they're called gods by God and the Son, the firstborn Son of God, right? It's like, how many levels of verification and evidence do you need, Trinitarians, before you stop rejecting biblical theology? I guess you need more than is possibly necessary to convince any reasonable person who's not using their tradition in place of the Word of God. The only begotten God, who is in the bosom with the Father, is the one that has explained him. What did Jesus say in John 14? It's not my words. I'm talking, I am explaining, but they're his words. The Father's in me. The Father is here. He's working through me. He's teaching through me. I'm not the Father. Even Trinitarians accept that. I'm telling you about the Father. I'm explaining him. I'm the only begotten God. I'm God's firstborn. I'm the firstborn Son of God. Me and the other sons of God were gods because we're spirits, just like God is a spirit, right? Hebrews 1 twice calls angels spirits. The Father is a spirit, John 4:24. The Son of God is a spirit, 1 Corinthians 15:45. He's described in the exact same terms and descriptions in Revelation 1:12 through 16 that the angel is in Daniel chapter 10. So it's impossible to miss unless your doctrine is getting in the way again. Only begotten God, the kind of God Jesus is, Trinitarians, which is not, the Father is not an only begotten God. He's not a monogenes theos. He's not a monogenes huios. He's the Father. Right? So there's a difference. There's a reason the Father's the Father and the Son's the Son, and it's not because of your ridiculous, non-biblical doctrine of eternal generation. Okay, that's later stuff. That's your attempt to make an excuse for what you can't get rid of from the Bible without looking like you're rejecting the Bible. So you just make stuff up, right? It's ridiculous. The Bible never presents that kind of thing. It talks about Jesus over and over again in temporal terms relative to the Father, whether it's the things he's told, right, given a revelation. The fact that he's a firstborn, that he's the Son of God, the Father's the Father. That he's given life by the Father. John 5:26, 6:57, Revelation 3:14, the beginning of the creation by God, which is exactly how wisdom is described in Proverbs 8, and Jesus identifies himself as the wisdom of God, not God's attribute, as the personification of that attribute. Matthew 23, Luke 11. And of course, there are many other texts like we've talked about before. Micah chapter 5, Proverbs 8:35 uses descriptions about the Messiah and his goings forth from earlier times that are what wisdom talks about in Proverbs 8:35, using the same terms. So it's all over the place in terms of the identification of Jesus as God's real firstborn son. Just defined for us, firstborn in Deuteronomy 21:17, as the beginning of God's generative power, or his children, Hebrew Septuagint. Both true with respect to Jesus as God's actual firstborn, right? And Trinitarians, even though they reject him as God's first creation, his firstborn, as the beginning of his generative power, like it's defined for us in the Bible, they never tell us who his real firstborn is, right? Well, if it's not Jesus, if he's not the beginning of God's generative power, the first of his children, who is, Trinitarians? You mean to tell us that Jesus is taking the title firstborn, such an honorific title that actually rightly belongs to someone else, another actual firstborn of God? There's no evidence of that anywhere in the Bible, and it's not applied to Jesus in a figurative context. And if it was, who is his real firstborn? We're never told that? Doesn't make any sense, because we are told that. It's Jesus. It's the only begotten God who explains his Father just like the other sons of God. John chapter 5. Let's take a look at other texts where Jesus makes it so clear it's impossible to miss. You can't. You can't miss it. You can only be blind and not see it. That's it, right? It's there all over the place numerous times, like we're going to review in addition to the text from John 14 and John 1, to show how Jesus is both Emmanuel, God with us, and how John prepared the way of Jehovah, which is the way of Jesus, because he's telling us everything the Father, Jehovah, is telling him to say. Jehovah, the Father, doing his works through the Son. It's not the Son. So if it's not the Son, how could it be the Son is Jehovah in the way? It's Jehovah, the Father, working through the Son. The Son denies being Jehovah, in fact, by saying it's not him. John 14, 9 and 10. These aren't my words. These aren't my works. Well, if they're not your works and they're not your words, you're not Jehovah, because Jehovah's the one whose way is being prepared. Oh, that's the Father? Okay, no problem. We understand. Son of God. We get it. Trinitarians? Well, it's another question, right? It's a different story. It's unfortunate because it's very clear, just like right here. John 5, 30 through 32. I cannot do a single thing of my own initiative. Does that sound like Jehovah to you? Trinitarians will say, well, that's him as a man. Well, you also say that it's him as a man saying he's the I am in John 8:58, which is, of course, not true, but that's what you say. So which is it, right? Is he able to be God as a man or not? And you say he's God with us as a man, and yet he's saying he can't do a single thing of his own initiative as a man. And of course, we know the true teaching is he emptied himself of the divine form of being a God. Philippians 2, 6 through 9. We know the truth. He became lower than the gods, the angels. Psalm 8:5, Hebrews 2, 7 through 9. We know the truth. The Word who was in the beginning with God as a God, Son of God, became flesh. Doesn't say he became a God-man anywhere. You just invent that to try to explain away texts like this. He's telling us right here it's someone else that he's representing. It's someone else he's speaking for. Someone else is doing works through him. That's the Jehovah. That's the God who's with us and whose way has been prepared. Just as I hear, I judge, and the judgment I render is righteous. That's very important, because remember what we read in Malachi 3:3, that the people he refines and cleanses would become to Jehovah people presenting a gift offering in righteousness. We'll talk about that more in a moment, but I wanted to highlight that right here, since Jesus attributes what he's saying both to the Father, what he hears, and his judgments as rendering, being a righteous rendering, because he seeks not his own will, but the will of him that sent me. It's not even his will. It's the Father everywhere and everything he's doing. If I bear witness about myself, my witness is not true. And yet we know that God bears witness about himself all over the place, all throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, because he doesn't need anybody to bear witness about him. Jesus says if he does that, it's not true. Well, if he's a God-man, it would be true. If he's the equivalent of Jehovah as the Son of God, even as a man, the divine nature part of him would still be able to do this, to bear witness about himself as God. And yet he says it would not be true. Then he goes on to say, there is another that bears witness about me, and I know that the witness which he bears about me is true. So there's a witness the Father presents that is true, and a witness that the Son presents about the same thing himself that's not true. They're not equal. He's telling us that right here because his witness about himself would not be true. But what the Father says about him, that's true. Then he goes on to say in verse 37, the Father who sent me has himself borne witness about me. Now, notice this last part. You have neither heard his voice at any time, nor seen his figure. Just like John 1:18, no one has seen God at any time. God is the Father, like I talked about in part 20 and part 19 of my Bible in the Trinity and Conflict series. So when we go back to Malachi 3:1, right? Malachi 3:1 has Jehovah, and I'm going to show that's the Father, speaking. I am sending my messenger, and he must clear up a way before me. So this has to be an angel talking for the Father, because no one has heard the Father's voice. The Son tells us that right here. So how do we know that that's the Father in Malachi and not another person of the Trinity? Well, the Trinity is not taught in the Bible, of course. It's in conflict with it, so we don't assume it. So it has nothing to do with the Bible. It's nowhere, it doesn't have any legs. It doesn't have any foundation in these texts to use it to interpret these texts. But I'm going to show that the Father is the only one that could be, even if it's an angel talking for him. The angel can only be talking for the Father as Jehovah God in Malachi 3:1. Right? So we just read John 5:37. You've neither heard his voice at any time, nor seen his figure. Now look down at John 5:43 and 44. These are incredibly important texts, as they all are. But in relation to the point I just made about Malachi 3:1, listen to this. I have come in the name of my Father. I have come in the name of my Father. The Father, John 14:9 and 10, he's doing his works through me, and I'm telling you what he says. I don't do anything on my own. I'm not doing my will. Father, I have come in the name of my Father. But you do not receive me. Listen, if someone else arrived in his own name, you would receive that one. Do you understand what he just said there? He just made it clear his name is not the same as his Father's. Who is the messenger of Malachi 3:1 preparing the way for? Jehovah. Who does Micah 5:4 say is the name of the Messiah's God? We did a whole video about these texts, of course, in this same series. And you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, the one too little to be among the thousands of Judah, Micah 5:2, from you there will come out to me the one who is to become ruler in Israel, whose origin is from early times, from the days of time indefinite. Micah 5:3, therefore he will give them up until the time that she is actually giving birth. The rest of his brothers will return to the sons of Israel, and he will certainly stand and do shepherding in the strength of Jehovah, in the superiority of the name of Jehovah his God. Jesus came in the name of his Father. We just read it, John 5:43 through 44. The name of his Father. He says, like we reviewed in part 20 of the Bible in the Trinity and Conflict, in John 20:17, I'm ascending to my Father and your Father and to my God. Who is Jesus God? the Father. He says that right here. It's explicit. You can't get any more clear. Yet, according to Micah 5:4, the Messiah would stand and do shepherding in the name of Jehovah his God. My Father and your Father, my God and your God. I've come in the name of my Father. Jehovah is the name of the Father. And it's not the name of the Son. He tells us that right here in John chapter 5. Yeah, it doesn't mean he doesn't speak as Jehovah, just like the angels speak as Jehovah in the burning bush, Acts 7. Or that he can be given the name, just as the angel of Jaho was given the name in the book of Exodus to lead the people of Israel, and they had to listen to his voice. That doesn't make it their name. They're given another person's name. That means it's not their name, or they'd already have it. John chapter 5, 43 and 44. If someone else arrived in his own name, Trinitarians say that Jesus is the second person of the Trinity, which is Jehovah, the God of the Bible. So then the Son would have, they argue all the time that he's called Jehovah, that he is Jehovah, right? Not just called Jehovah as a representative of Jehovah. That's our view. That's what the Bible teaches. They argue that's actually his name as the eternal second person of the Trinity. He says right here that's not true. I've come in the name of my Father. If someone else arrived in his own name, meaning that's not what he did, right? He's saying that if he did arrive in his own name, they would accept him. That shows right here that's not his name. Because they would accept him. He says that right there. If someone else arrived in his own name, I have come in the name of my Father. You're not accepting me because I'm not arriving in my own name. I'm arriving in the name of the Father, which is not my name. Jehovah his God. Micah 5:4 stands and does shepherding. I did a whole video about it. Did several videos about it. My Father and your Father, my God and your God. Jehovah his God. If someone else arrived in his own name, you would accept that one. You would receive that one. You're rejecting me because I didn't arrive in my own name. I arrived in the name of the Father. What's the name of the Father? Jehovah his God. It couldn't be any more clear that no matter in what sense the Son of God is given the name of God, represents that God, like the other angels do, like in the burning bush, like on Mount Sinai, Acts chapter 7, talked about it. I have a whole video playing on the front page of this channel right now, or you can check the video archives. It's all over the place that they act in that way. He's telling us right here, he's coming in the name of his Father, which is not his own name, or they would receive him. This is also telling us, in addition to proving absolutely that Jesus' name is not Jehovah, unless he's given that name, further proving his name is not Jehovah, it proves he's coming in the name of Jehovah, which is exactly what Micah 5:4 said the Messiah would do. Yet Trinitarians not only remove that name from the Bible, they remove the identity of the Father in comparison to the Son from the Bible, and they replace it with a false doctrine. It's incredible. Verse 44, how can you believe when you are accepting glory from one another and you are not seeking the glory that is from the only God? I didn't bring this text up in parts 20 and 19. I should have, because it fits perfectly to show once again that in the absolute sense in which the Father is God, there is only one God. There are others who are called gods, just as there are many gods. Sons of God are gods. Jesus and God say so. Psalm 82, John 10. But there is a sense in which the Father is the only God. It uses monos right here. Only God, Trinitarians. Do you believe only means only? Yeah, we know there can be exceptions at times. even though you don't allow for exceptions when terms like all are used. I'm going to get to it further in a moment. You always want it your way. Yet here it makes it plain, the Father is the only God, right? And I'm going to show further that this is the Father, even though it's very obvious, right? He comes in the name of his Father. He's seeking glory from the Father, whom he calls here the only God. And remember this part right here. Not seeking the glory that is from the only God. I'm going to show further that's the Father. And that again, the Father is exclusively God in the one God sense that we're told God is God, our God, Jesus God, John 20:17, 1 Corinthians 8:6. It could not be more clear. The Trinitarian doctrine distorts all of this. John 6:38. Because I have come down from heaven to do not my will. Well, if he's eternally the Son, one with the Father, how could it not be his will that he do these things? How could he not be speaking his words? How could he not simply, as the second person of the Trinity with his divine nature, be working through his human nature and doing his own works as part of the Trinity? And that's because the Father's the one who tells him what to do, who teaches him what to do. He doesn't know all these things from eternity like the Father does, or from the point that the Father knows it, like in the Garden of Eden when he decided what to do. We'll get into it in another video, and I've talked about it in other videos and writings about predestination and the knowledge of God, right? I did a whole debate with Dr. Robert Morey. You can listen to it on the debate playlist on the channel. He's come down from heaven not to do his will, but the will of him that sent him. That's the Father, right? The Father's the one who sent him. John 6:45. He says right here in 44, no one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him. So he's doing only the will of the Father. So if Malachi 3:1 says that the messenger that will go before Jehovah will prepare his way, Jehovah's way, how could that in any way identify the Son as Jehovah when, number one, the Son says over and over and over and over and over again, and we're not even halfway through the references that show this, that he's not telling us what is his will, that he's not doing his works. It's the Father. And that he came in the Father's name, which both he, John 20:17, and Micah prophesying about what he would do, 5:4, that Jehovah his God, the Father his God, he came in the name of that God, not his own name, John 5:43 through 44. So if he's not coming in his own name, and the name of the Father is Jehovah his God, then Jehovah, the one whom the messenger in Malachi 3:1 prepares the way for, cannot be the Son. It can't be. He's not coming in his own name. He's coming in the name of the Father. Jehovah, his God. And then he says in verse 45, it is written in the prophets, they will all be taught by Jehovah. Everyone that has heard from the Father and has learned comes to me. So is this making him Jehovah because he says he's taught by Jehovah? Or all would be taught by Jehovah? He's quoting from Isaiah 54:13. Well, he goes on to say in verse 46, not that any man has seen the Father. Right? What did he do right there? He right there again identified Jehovah as the Father, not the Trinity. He did that already in John 5:43 through 44, right? Because he said he's come in the name of his Father. Micah 5:4 says he would come in the name, he would shepherd and stand in the strength of Jehovah, his God. He says it's not his own name, John 5:44. It's the name of the Father. Right here, he quotes Isaiah 54:13, quoting the divine name, Trinitarians, not in your Bible though, right? Terrible. Right after he quotes that, he says, everyone that has heard from the Father and has learned. So who's teaching Trinitarians? Isaiah 54:13 says they'll all be taught by Jehovah. And then the Son says it's the Father that they learn from. And then he goes on to say, not that anyone has seen the Father, right? Because what? He's talking about what the Father's telling him to say. So he's denying right here being Jehovah, because it says they'll all be taught by Jehovah. He says that that's the Father that they learn from, and not that anyone has seen the Father, right? Except he who is from God. This one has seen the Father. He's talking about the Father being the one teaching. The Father as Jehovah. The Father. He makes it explicit. It's not him. I haven't come in my own name or you would accept me. Right there, he's denying being Jehovah from all eternity. It's the Father, his God. Right here, he quotes a prophecy from Isaiah that he could easily say is fulfilled in him and the Father, right? I'm teaching you, the Father's teaching you, we're two persons of the Trinity. He says, no, that's from the Father. And just so you're not confused, because I'm the one who's talking, right? This is before John 14. This is why he tells Philip and everybody there, have I been with you this long? You don't get it? All of this happens before John 14. Not that any man has seen the Father. Right? And remember, he's talking about men here. He's not talking about other sons of God, except he who is from God. This one has seen the Father, because he was with the Father before he became a man. As a real personal being that could actually see somebody. And now let's make it even more explicitly clear that Jesus is not Jehovah from all eternity, that he's actually denying being that in John 5:43 and 44, when you look at Micah 5:4 and John 20:17, and the fact that he denies coming in his own name, otherwise they would receive him, right? So he's not coming in his own name. He's coming in the name of the Father, which is what? Jehovah. It's not his name. Sorry, Trinitarians. You believe false doctrine. And you blaspheme the God of the Bible and the Son. John 17. So they will all be taught by Jehovah. Isaiah 54:13. He specifically links this to the Father, denies that even though he's the one saying the words, that's fulfilled in him, right? It's the Father. It's his words. John 14:9 and 10. I'm not coming to my will. I'm telling you what the Father says. He's been saying it over and over. No more clear than here. John 7:15 through 18. This is how we also know. Remember back here when he talked about in John 5:43 and 44, how they were seeking glory from each other, but not the glory that's from the only God. Look at John 7:15 through 18 in that light. And of course, what we just read in John 6:45 through 46 about all being taught by Jehovah, whom Jesus says is the Father. Verse 15, therefore the Jews fell to wondering, saying, how does this man have a knowledge of letters when he has not studied at the schools? Jesus in turn answered them and said, what I teach is not mine, but belongs to him that sent me. They will all be taught by Jehovah. Isaiah 54:13. Not that any man has seen the Father, right? I'm talking, don't get confused here, right? They all learn from the Father and come to me, because the Father's doing his works through me. I'm not saying a thing of my own originality. John 14:9 and 10. What I teach is not mine. Trinitarians, he's denying being Jehovah right here. If they will all be taught by Jehovah, and if Jehovah is the Trinity, or if Jesus is second person co-equal with the Father, he's not teaching anything that is his. Nothing. But we will all be taught by Jehovah. So if we're being taught by Jehovah, and the teaching is not his, He's not Jehovah. He's telling you that over and over and over again, even though he, like the other angels, do speak as Jehovah. They represent their Father. They're not him, though. Not that any man has seen the Father. No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten God who's in the bosom with the Father, the special position, the firstborn, has explained him. Have I been with you so long a time? You don't know what I'm talking about yet? You've seen me, you've seen the Father. Father's doing his works. I'm speaking the Father's words. What I'm saying is not mine. This teaching is not mine. Yeah, you'll all be taught by Jehovah, Isaiah 54:13, because that's the Father. Because I'm telling you the teaching of the Father belongs to him that sent me. If anyone desires to do his will, he will know concerning the teaching whether it is from God. Trinitarians. How many gods are there? Or I speak of my own originality. He's not just speaking as a man, everybody. Remember what he said right here. He said, not that any man has seen the Father except he who is from God. Well, when did he see God? When he was the Word, a spirit, the wisdom, with God in the beginning, before he became a man. So he's not just talking about being a man. He's talking about everything. When he was with God, when he came from God and saw the Father, when he received from the Father what he's teaching. So if it originated with him when he was in heaven with the Father as the second person of the Trinity, and he's now just taken on a human nature, well, according to Trinitarians, he's still God the Son. So it would have originated with him. It didn't, though. None of this did. He says God, whether it is from God, the only God, Trinitarians. According to John 5:43-44, Jesus' own words, proven further that it's not him right here. Verse 18, he that speaks of his own originality is seeking his own glory. What did John 5:43 and 45 say? Remember, this all proves that John preparing the way of Jehovah is about the Father. It doesn't matter if it's through the Son or in the Son, the firstborn one. That's not Jehovah. He didn't come in his own name. He came in the name of the Father, his God. If he did come in his own name, you would receive him. You didn't receive him because he didn't come in his own name. He came in the name of the Father, the Jehovah that is named in Malachi 3:1. Remember, John 5:44. How can you believe when you're accepting glory from one another and you're not seeking the glory that is from the only God? We already know that the Father is the only true God. Jesus taught it explicitly, John 17:3. And no, that doesn't mean he's a false God, Trinitarians. That's just your terrible, horrific logic because you don't recognize the sons of God as gods that just aren't the true God in the ultimate sense in which God is God. The one God, the Father. The only God. You are not seeking the glory that is from the only God. Now take that to John 7:18. Look at what he says. He that speaks of his own originality is seeking his own glory. The glory that is from the only God. But he that seeks the glory of him that sent him, who was sent? The Word, right? Even though I think that was the name he was given later. He's called the Word in John 1:1. The Word became flesh. This one is true and there's no unrighteousness in him. He says right here that he's not seeking his own glory. Right here. Because he's not speaking of his own originality, so he's not seeking his own glory. He seeks the glory of him that sent him. John 5:44, Trinitarians and everybody. And you are not seeking the glory that is from the only God. So he's seeking the glory that is from the only God, identified right here as the Father, his God. Micah 5:4, John 20:17. It's not possible to misunderstand Jesus unless you are blind, like the scribes and Pharisees who rejected Jesus, or like Trinitarians today who absolutely reject the Jesus and the Father, the only God of the Bible. It is so clear, everybody, when you just look at the words of Jesus and his teaching, which is not his, it's from God. They deny God's teaching. John 8:26. We'll read verse 26 through 30. I have many things to speak concerning you and to pass judgment upon. As a matter of fact, he that sent me is true. And the very things I heard from him, I am speaking in the world. I heard from him when I was with him before I came into the world. And I learned all this stuff. He taught me. And now I'm telling you. I'm not coming in my own name. This isn't my teaching. It's the Father, my God. You know, because I'm fulfilling Micah 5:4, Jehovah, his God, the Father, my God. It's not my own name. It's the Father's name. If it was my own name, you would receive me. You're not receiving me because it's not my own name. It's the Father's name. I'm seeking the glory that's from the only God, the Father. Once again, explicit. Jesus is not eternally Jehovah. He can be like the other sons of God, Jehovah to us, God to us, because that's the only God. I talked about it extensively in parts 19 and 20 of the Bible and Trinity in Conflict. You can't miss it. It's all over the place. Just like we keep reading over and over and over again right here. They did not grasp he's talking to them about the Father. Therefore, Jesus said, when once you've lifted up the Son of Man, then you'll know that I am he. Ani hu, I he, ego me, I am he. Just like you see right here, because he is understood predicate, referring to him as the Son of Man in the context right here, not the divine name. There is no divine I am. I've done videos about it. I've written books about it. Nobody can establish that as true from the Bible. It's a false doctrine. All these Trinitarian Bibles that are using I, capital A, capital M, or just M with a capital A, are mistranslating the texts where they do so and presenting false doctrine. I do nothing of my own initiative, but just as the Father taught me. Right? Remember what he said earlier. The very things I heard from him, I'm speaking in the world. The Father taught him all this stuff when he wasn't in the world. When he saw God. Like he told us earlier. And he that sent me is with me. Have I been with you so long a time? You still don't understand. I'm not telling you my own words. I'm telling you what the Father taught me. The Father, he's in me. John 14:9 and 10. He's in me doing his works. He that sent me is with me. He did not abandon me to myself, because I always do the things pleasing to him. Just like wisdom in Proverbs chapter 8. As he was speaking these things, many put faith in him, because he's teaching the truth. Just like he does a couple verses later in verse 42. Jesus said to them, if God were your Father, you would love me. For from God I came forth and am here. Neither have I come of my own initiative at all, but that one sent me forth. I'm not in my own name. I'm in the name of the Father, the only God, the Jehovah of Micah 3:1, the Jehovah, of Malachi 3:1, the Jehovah of Micah 5:4, my God, the Father, John 20:17. And look at verse 50. I am not seeking glory for myself. There is one that is seeking and judging. We already read who that was, right? We just saw it. John 7:18. He that speaks of his own originality is seeking his own glory. He that seeks the glory of him that sent him is true. John 6:40. John 5:44. How can you believe when you're accepting glory from one another and you're not seeking the glory that is from the only God? Jesus is seeking glory from that only God. He's not that only God. He's not a person of that only God. That only God is the Father, the one in whose name he has come. John 12:49 and 50, everyone. Because I have not spoken out of my own impulse, but the Father who sent me has given me a commandment. I've been commanded to tell you these things as to what to tell and to what to speak. Also, I know that his commandment means everlasting life. Therefore, the things I speak, just as the Father told me, so I speak. It could not be any more clear how John the Baptist, as we're going to show next, as the messenger that is sent to prepare the way of Jehovah, it could not be any more clear from Jesus' own words how that is true, in that he is representing the Father, his God, the one in whose name he has come. Not his own name, not to glorify himself. He's speaking for Jehovah. Jehovah's speaking, working through him. All will be taught by Jehovah. Everyone who's learned from the Father. Not that anyone has seen the Father, except he who is from God. What I teach is not mine, Trinitarians. Yet we're all taught by Jehovah. It's not his teaching. So he's not Jehovah. And he's not in his own name. He's in the name of the Father. Jehovah, his God. Explicit. Over and over and over again. Let's go to Matthew chapter 11. Look at how Jesus quotes Malachi 3:1. I think it's so interesting, just like everything Jesus says and teaches, because it's from the Father. Matthew 11:7-10. Look at this. While these were on their way, Jesus started to say to the crowds respecting John the Baptist, "What did you go out in the wilderness to behold? A reed being tossed by wind?" Verse 8, "What then did you go out to see? A man dressed in soft garments? Why, those wearing soft garments are in the houses of kings." Verse 9, "Really then, what did you go out? Why did you go out? To see a prophet? Yes, I tell you, and far more than a prophet. This is he," talking about John. "This is he concerning whom it is written, 'Look, I myself am sending forth my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way ahead of you.'" What did Malachi 3:1 actually say? I am sending my messenger, and he must clear up a way before me. Do you see? Jesus is once again absolutely denying being Jehovah. He's done it over and over and over again, other than in the representative way in which the sons of God are Jehovah to us, are God to us. Malachi 3:1 uses the first person pronoun. Matthew 11:10 uses the second person pronoun. Jesus is talking. So if Jesus is the Jehovah of Malachi 3:1, why, when there's no manuscript supporting a second person pronoun, why, Trinitarians, would Jesus change the pronoun from a first person to a second person? Because he's quoting Jehovah about himself. And because he's not Jehovah of Malachi 3:1, which we've proven conclusively using Jesus' own teachings, he does it again right here. He changes the quotation from Malachi 3:1 so that he doesn't identify himself as the one speaking. You tell me, why else would he do that? Why else would he change from the first person if he's the one talking in the first person in Malachi 3:1? Why would he change to the second person? Twice. Because, like we've been reading more than twice, he hasn't come in his own name. He's come in the name of the Father. So his name is not the name of the Father, unless he's given that name like the other sons of God are given that name to act as their Father. The Father is his God, John 20:17. Micah 5:4 prophesied that the Messiah would come in the name of Jehovah, his God. The Father is his God, John 20:17. And he hasn't come in the name of his God, which is Jehovah, John 5:43 and 44. Otherwise, they would receive him. And he changes the quotation of Malachi 3:1 to show he's different than the one speaking. Even if it's an angel, even him speaking, because they're speaking for someone else. Like he's been telling us in all these texts. They're not my words. They're not my teaching. It's not my will. It's the Father. I'm here, I'm talking, but it's not me. It's the Father you're hearing and you're seeing. That's how God is with us, Emmanuel, Isaiah 7:14. That's how John the Baptist prepared the way of Jehovah, Malachi 3:1. And that's why he changed the first person pronoun to a second one, a second person pronoun in Matthew 11:10. John 3, let's go to another text. Let's try to give the Trinitarians a little confidence here for just a moment. Because we know how they like to misuse texts that involve the term all. So in John 3:25, let's read 25 through 36. It says, therefore a dispute rose on the part of the disciples of John the Baptist, the messenger who would come to prepare the way of Jaho, the Father, the one in whose name Jesus came, not his own name, otherwise they'd listen to him. His God, the Father, not his words, not his teaching, Father's. All will be taught by Jehovah. What I teach is not mine. I'm not Jehovah, but I'm teaching you the words of Jehovah because I'm his son. I'm his firstborn one. I'm the only begotten God who explains him. A dispute arose on the part of the disciples of John with a Jew concerning purification. So they came to John and said to him, Rabbi, the man that was with you across the Jordan, talking about Jesus, to whom you have borne witness, see, this one is baptizing and all are going to him. In answer, John said, a man cannot receive a single thing unless it has been given to him from heaven. You yourselves bear witness that I said I am not the Christ, but I have been sent forth in advance of that one. He that has the bride is the bridegroom. However, the friend of the bridegroom, when he stands and hears him, has a great deal of joy on account of the voice of the bridegroom. Therefore, this joy of mine has been made full. That one, talking about Jesus, must go on increasing, but I must go on decreasing. Listen, he that comes from above is over all others. NWT uses others here, not in brackets, even though it doesn't say others. We'll get to that in a moment, but just notice, he that comes from above is over all, talking about Jesus. He that is from the earth is from the earth and speaks of the things of the earth. He's talking about himself in comparison to humans, because they're talking about John, who's a human. He that comes from heaven is over all. NWT adds others here, not in brackets. Now, this last part isn't completely, universal in the early manuscripts. I think P75 in the original of Sinaiticus does not include this overall here. But this part here is pretty much, consistent throughout all the main texts. So, let's read the rest of it right through verse 35. 36. What he has seen and heard, of this he bears witness, but no man is accepting his witness, right? What he has seen and heard, remember what he told us earlier? Although it's later in this account of John, but we read it earlier. He saw the Father. He was with the Father. He learned from the Father, and he's telling us everything he learned. He that has accepted his witness has put his seal to it that God is true. For the one whom God sent forth, the only God, Trinitarians, the only God that people are supposed to be seeking glory from, and that Jesus is seeking glory from, the Father, the only God, the one whom God sent forth speaks the sayings of God, for he does not give the Spirit by measure. The Father, right? That's who they're talking about. Loves the Son. That's who they're talking about. God sent forth. The one God sent forth. The one, the only God, the Father sent forth. Speaks the sayings of God. He's not God in the sense that God is God, because otherwise they would be his sayings. And we've read over and over again that they're not. And we're told right here that they're not. Father loves the Son, has given all things into his hand. He that exercises faith in the Son has everlasting life. He that disobeys the Son will not see life, but the wrath of God remains upon him. So what about this above all others, or above all? Well, I believe NWT is correct in using others here, because I think the context shows that it's talking about him in comparison to people like John. That John is basically saying that he's above all others, everyone else who's come, including me. So humans in that sense. But because we know how Trinitarians are, right? They abuse the term all in the Bible, and they condemn the NWT for using other in Colossians 1, 15 through 17, even though it specifically and explicitly identifies the other as the firstborn that could not have been created through himself. And of course, they don't believe that all means all in verse 18, when it says he is first in all things. So they have all kinds of problems in other texts. But let's go real quickly, since this account kind of connects with our subject as John being the messenger, the one who's sent forth to prepare the way. Jesus identified him specifically in connection with Malachi 3:1, using the second person pronoun, showing that he's not the one speaking in the first person in Malachi 3:1. John chapter 10, verse 29. Remember this when Trinitarians try to bring up John 3:25 through 36 and is above all, and they criticize others, and they don't see it as contextually related to Jesus in comparison to humans like John. Remember John 10:29. What my Father has given me is greater than all other things. Another instance where the NWT uses other. It's not in the Greek text, and it's not in brackets. Are they trying to be deceptive here? Was that what they were trying to do in John 3? Well, Jesus says, and no one can snatch them out of the hand of the Father. What has he been given here? He's talking about the disciples. Are the disciples greater than all? They're not greater than the Son, and they're not greater than the Father, who's greater than the Son, John 14:28, right? Trinitarians fail to understand the Bible. I mean, we've seen that over and over again, right? But when it comes to all and other, you're rarely going to see a greater collapse on the part of the Trinitarians. Their failure to understand the use of all or only in text is incredible. Remember John 10:29, if anyone brings up John 3:25 through 36. Or Colossians 1, right? Now, let's make one last text comparison. Look at Malachi. So we've talked explicitly, right, about how Jesus has really been sent as the representative, right? as an angel, really. So John too, but in a human sense, and Jesus as a human, as an angel. But I don't think it could be more explicit that he's also an angel even now than Revelation 1:1. I did a whole video about it as part of the Bible in the Trinity and Conflict series to show how he receives message from God while in heaven as a spirit. Revelation 1:12-16. Same descriptions of Jesus as in Daniel 10, the angelic being. I don't think it can get any more explicit than that, or 1 Thessalonians 4:16, of course. But look at Malachi 2, right? All these texts that show that Jesus has been sent forth, right? That he's clearly representing not his own will or teaching or words, but the Father, right? Just like an angel would do. Malachi 2:7. For the lips of a priest are the ones that should keep knowledge, and the law is what people should seek from his mouth, for he is the messenger of Jehovah of armies, right? Applying to human priests here. But what kind of priest is Jesus now? Hebrews chapter 2. Hebrews chapter 2. Verses 17-32. Consequently, we are obliged to become like, he was obliged to become like his brothers in all respects, that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in all things pertaining to God, in order to offer propitiatory sacrifice for the sins of the people. For in that he himself suffered when being put to the test, he's able to come to the aid of those who are being put to the test. Right? Talking about him as a spirit, as a life-giving spirit. 1 Corinthians 15:45. As a spirit. Described in Revelation 1:12-16, the same way as the Spirit. In Daniel 10, consequently, holy brothers, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest whom we confess, Jesus. He was faithful to the one that made him. NWT adds made him such, but it really just says made him, created him, poieo, as Moses was also in the house of that one. But here, in addition to calling him created right here, it could be talking to him as a human. But either way, it's talking about him as a heavenly being here, right? The one they confess. The apostle and high priest. Jesus is sent forth by God as an apostle. Revelation 1:1. God gave him a revelation, and he sent it forth through his angels to John. And a high priest. He acts as a high priest right now and comes to our aid when we're having difficulty because he has experienced difficulty himself. He's a high priest. Well, again, what did Malachi 2:7 say? Since we're in the context of Malachi 3:1 and we're talking about how Jesus represents Jehovah, the one who's speaking in the first person in Malachi 3:1, but Jesus uses the second person to refer to him as God's representative in Matthew 11:10, in fulfillment of that text, with John as the messenger who cleared up the way before the one speaking in Malachi 3:1, that was represented in the person of the Son that doesn't do or say or come of his own will at all, because he's not that one. Malachi 2:7, the priest is the messenger, the angel of Jaho of armies. Now, what about this Lord, right? Because Malachi 3:1 talks about how the messenger, that is John, we saw Jesus identify him explicitly in Matthew 11, clears up a way before the one speaking in the first person here, who is not Jesus, who speaks of himself in fulfillment of this text as the second person here, and who doesn't do his own will, who comes in the name of his Father, not his own name, the name of the one who's speaking here. It says there will come to his temple the Lord. Now in Hebrew it uses the term adohn. And in the 1984 NWT appendix, in Appendix 1H, it says, the title adohn, Lord Master, when preceded by the definite article the, gives the expression adohn, the true Lord, in brackets, true, like in the text here. The use of the definite article before the title adohn limits the application of this title exclusively to Jehovah God. And then it refers to adohn being occurring in Malachi 3:1, right? So obviously, the writer of that appendix understood the Lord here as Jehovah. Yet, a lot of Watchtower haters and Trinitarian people will try to use that appendix and this text because we often identify this Lord as Jesus. And I think that's probably correct. But it could also be, like the NWT Appendix 1H says, a reference to Jehovah God because of everything we've been reading, everybody. The Father is with me. He said that in John. The Father is with me and has not abandoned me. The Father is in me doing his works. I'm not teaching my will. It's the Father, the only God. So there absolutely is a sense explicitly taught by Jesus, and with his use of the second person pronoun, where it uses the first person in Malachi 3:1, in which this Lord could be Jehovah the Father, the one in whose name Jesus came, not his own name. And then I believe Jesus is this messenger of the covenant. But I'll get to that in a second. Let's look, though, more at how Jesus can also be this Lord. Right? There are numerous times in the Bible where angels are called lords or Lord, my Lord, right? Including, like we've been referring to frequently in this discussion, Daniel chapter 10, where Daniel, in verses 16, 17, and 19, he says, "And look, one similar to the likeness of the sons of mankind was touching my lips, and I began to open my mouth and speak and say to the one who was standing in front of me, O my Lord." Verse 17, "So how was the servant of this my Lord able to speak with this my Lord?" Speaking with an angel here. And verse 19, "Then he said, Do not be afraid, O desirable man, may you have peace. Be strong, yes, be strong. As soon as he spoke with me, I exerted my strength and finally said, Let my Lord speak." Now, it doesn't use adohn here, but again, just because the NWT Appendix 1H says that that's always exclusively Jehovah God, that doesn't prove it. That's just their interpretation based on the limited number of instances of that expression. And it could be true, but it doesn't have to be true. There's nothing magical. I'm not magical, right? I mean magical in the sense of special. There's nothing in the Bible that says adohn only applies to Jehovah the Father or Jehovah, right? There's no Trinity, so it'd have to be the Father, the only God, like we've been reading. So it just means the Lord. That's it. And it can refer to God, and it obviously has a special meaning, but Lord is Lord. It has to do with the subject. Who are we talking about? And in what sense? Well, here we have an angelic being who's representing God, just like angelic beings do all throughout the Bible, being addressed 3 times in several verses as my Lord. So Lord, in the my possessive sense, is not exclusive to God. And then we have Daniel chapter 12, verse 8, where it happens again. Right here, "Now as for me, I heard, but I could not understand, so that I said, O my Lord, what will be the final part of these things?" So we have Daniel here directly addressing an angelic being, calling him my Lord, and asking for information about what will take place. Then in Zechariah, we get something very similar. All throughout, we have the angel of Jaho speaking as Jaho, as God, being addressed as Lord. Zechariah 1:9, "And so I said, Who are these, my Lord? And at that the angel who was speaking with me said to me, I myself will show you who these very ones are." Same thing in Zechariah 4:4. "Then I answered and said to the angel who was speaking with me, What do these things mean, my Lord?" And same in verse 5. "So the angel who was speaking with me answered and said to me, Do you not really know what these things mean?" In turn I said, "No, my Lord." Also in verse 13, so he said to me, do you not really know what these things mean? In turn I said, no, my Lord. And then in chapter 6, verse 4, I proceeded to answer and say to the angel who was speaking with me, what are these, my Lord? And we get a similar thing in Revelation chapter 7, of course, where the one of the 24 elders is speaking with John. And in verse 14, here in verse 13, it says one of the elders talks to him about the great crowd. And so right away, John says to him, my Lord, you are the one that knows. Right? He doesn't say, well, only God knows. He's addressing this one as an angelic being who represents God, who's been given authority to speak to John in these ways. So angels being called Lord is all over the place. I didn't even refer to every single time that this happens. And there's nothing in the Bible that says adohn has to only refer to Jehovah God the Father. It may. And Malachi 3:1, when it refers to adohn, may be referring to the Father. But it could also easily be referring to the one who came in the Father's name and who spoke only and who did only what the Father wanted him to do and that the Father did through him. John 13. Right, so we have these angels, which in many cases is probably Jesus himself, since he's the angel of Jaho, right? The one whom the Israelites followed, according to Paul, in the wilderness. The one whom Jaho sent forth to guide them with his name in him, who was given authority to pardon and not pardon, and whom even Jude refers to or associates with Jesus. Let's see, John 13. And we have Jesus here as a man saying that it's okay to address him as teacher and Lord. So he could also be the Lord that came to either his temple, in the sense that it's God's temple, but that Jesus is God's representative, is coming to, right? Because the Father is with him. He has not abandoned him. He's in him doing his works. He's in the name of the Father, not his own name. He's seeking the glory from that only God. So he's not that only God. He's not speaking in Malachi 3:1. He told us that explicitly by quoting Malachi 3:1 with second person pronouns, not first person, which would have identified it as himself. And even if he did, right, he could still be speaking for the Father as the angels do. But he didn't even do that. He made a clear break, changing the pronouns that are used from what's in the text. Then, of course, we have in Luke chapter 2, verse 11, the prophecy about him being born, right? Just like the ruler of Bethlehem, which we can see is also fulfilled here. Micah 5:4, come in the name of Jehovah his God. Born today a Savior who is Christ the Lord in David's city. So there's clearly a basis for identifying Jesus as the Lord who would come to his temple, referring to God's temple, which Jesus does, as we're going to see in just a moment. And then we have Acts 2:36. Why is Jesus Lord at all? Well, we talked about this extensively in part 19 of the Bible and the Trinity in conflict. But Acts 2:36 states, therefore let all the house of Israel know for a certainty that God made him both Lord and Christ, this Jesus whom you impaled. He's not Lord from all eternity, the way God is Lord from all eternity. So when he's referred to as Lord, you address me as teacher and Lord, there's born today a Savior, Christ the Lord. It's because God made him Lord. Just like in Philippians 2, after he gave his life and was resurrected, he was again made Lord because he showed himself faithful. Is it to his own glory? What does it say? Philippians 2, 9 through 11. For this very reason, that he found himself in fashion as a man and gave himself all the way through death, God exalted him to a superior position, not only as the ruler of the angels, but as the one with all authority in heaven and on earth, including authority over the angels who are subjected to him, as we read in 1 Peter 3:21, I believe. To a superior position, and kindly gave him the name that is above every name, or every other name, depending on how you understand it, right? But gave him the name. It's not his name. He came in his Father's name, not his own name. His Father's name, his God's name, is Jehovah. And whether that's the name he's given here, the fact is, in the name of Jesus, every knee will bow, those in heaven and those on the earth and those under the ground, and every tongue confess Jesus is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. He's not seeking glory from the only God, because he's not the only God. The only God gives him the glory that he is seeking by allowing him to represent him, because he's been doing it this whole time, and the Father obviously believes that he can keep doing it. And so he exalts him to the position where he can keep doing it. Let's just make sure we have that text right. Yeah, 1 Peter 3:22, he is at God's right hand, went his way to heaven, and angels and authorities and powers were made subject to him. By God, the one who exalted him to that superior position, not to his own glory. He's not seeking his own glory. He's seeking the glory that's from the only God. The only God gives it to him because it's to the only God's glory, not to the glory of the Trinity. Glory of God the Father, Trinitarians. Now let's look at how Jesus, not John, is the messenger of the covenant in Malachi 3:1. Right, the true Lord would come to his temple, and the messenger of the covenant whom you desire. I believe that the messenger of the covenant and the Lord that comes to his temple are both Jesus, or it's Jehovah and Jesus, but it would be Jesus representing Jehovah, because it's Jehovah the Father working through Jesus, the one in whose name Jesus came, not his own name. Right? We've made that explicit. You can't miss it unless you're Trinitarian. Matthew chapter 26. John the Baptist is really never presented in association with the covenant, the new covenant. Jesus is. Matthew 26:27 through 28. Also he took a cup, and having given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink out of it, all of you, for this means my blood of the covenant, which is poured out in your behalf for forgiveness of sins. And you can read the same thing in Mark 14:23 through 24, and in Luke 22. Let's actually go to Luke real quickly here. Luke 22. 22:19. Here's where he does the same thing that we just read. He takes a loaf, gives thanks in the same way he takes the cup. This cup means the new covenant by virtue of my blood. And then in verse 28 through 30, he says, however, you are the ones that have stuck with me in my trials, and I make a covenant with you, just as my Father has made a covenant with me for a kingdom, that you may eat and drink and sit at my table in my kingdom, and sit on thrones to judge the 12 tribes of Israel. Again, everything having to do with the covenant in the New Testament is associated with Jesus, never with John. Let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 11. 1 Corinthians 11, 23 through 26. For I received from the Lord that which I also handed on to you, that the Lord Jesus, in the night in which he was going to be handed over, took a loaf. And after giving thanks, he broke it and said, this means my body, which is in your behalf. Keep doing this in remembrance of me. He did likewise respecting the cup after he had the evening meal, saying, this cup means the new covenant by virtue of my blood. So again, everywhere in the New Testament, the covenant is associated with Jesus, not John. 2 Corinthians 3, 4 through 6. Now, through the Christ, we have this sort of confidence toward God that not that we of ourselves are adequately qualified to reckon anything as issuing from ourselves, but our being adequately qualified issues from God, who has indeed adequately qualified us to be ministers of a new covenant, not of a written code, but of spirit. The written code condemns to death, the Spirit makes alive. You are shown to be a letter of Christ. Now, through Christ, we have this confidence. Again, the new covenant associated with the Christ. Hebrews chapter 8, verse 6. Now, Jesus has obtained a more excellent public service so that he is also mediator of a correspondingly better covenant. Mediator. He's the angel, the messenger of the covenant. He's the mediator of that covenant. Everything having to do with the covenant is associated with Jesus, not John. Hebrews 9:15. So that is why he is mediator of a new covenant. Mediator, messenger. He's the go-between. He's the one communicating. He's the high priest offering sacrifices on our behalf, coming to our aid, mediating this new covenant of salvation through faith in him. He's the messenger of the covenant in Malachi chapter 3. Hebrews 12, 22 through 24. He's not the messenger that clears up the way before Jehovah, the God of the Messiah, the one in whose name he came, not his own name. He's the messenger of the covenant, and probably the Lord, the adohn. Although, again, it could be the Father, the God, who's speaking in that text, which Jesus showed he is not in Matthew 11:10. But he's definitely, I believe, the angel of the covenant, because John is nowhere shown to be a messenger of the new covenant. Jesus is. Hebrews 12:23. He's the mediator of the new covenant. It's through him that this new covenant is communicated to the disciples, and that the apostles then, of course, practice and speak about in association with Jesus, not John. Hebrews 12:22. You've approached to Mount Zion, city of the living God, heavenly Jerusalem, myriads of angels, in general assembly, the congregation of the firstborn who have been enrolled in the heavens, and God the judge of all, and the spiritual lives of righteous ones who have been made perfect, and Jesus, differentiated from the judge of all, because he only judges according to what he's told and what the Father tells him to judge. He hears and he judges. And the judgment he seeks is not his own. And Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant. Over and over again, it's Jesus. And then, as we read in Malachi 3, 2 and 3, the one who would come, this Lord or angel of the covenant, again, it refers using the singular pronoun in the Greek and Masoretic text in verse 2, and also verse 1. Verse 1. But, we'll just go to it real quickly, but in the Dead Sea Scroll 4Q76, in verse 2, it does use them. However, that could be both John, the messenger who clears up the way, and the Lord, who is the angel of the covenant, if you see both those two references as the same thing. In Malachi 3:1, verse 2, it says, he will be like the fire of a refiner and like the lyre of laundrymen. He must sit as a refiner and cleanser of silver. This is after he comes to the temple. And he will clarify them like gold and silver, and they'll become to Jehovah people presenting a gift offering in righteousness. Right? So because they're not that way right now. They're in a condition where they're not refined. They're not purified. So what does this involve? Well, we find fulfillment of this in Jesus explicitly as well. Over and over again, let's just read a few representative texts. Right? There's no one who represented in the way that Jesus is as coming into the temple, speaking to the Jews, reprimanding them, correcting them, refining them so that they can be an acceptable offering to God in righteousness. Matthew 5:20. For I say to you, if your righteousness does not abound more than that of the scribes and Pharisees, you'll by no means enter into the kingdom. Again, this idea of him refining them by condemning the Pharisees and showing what you're not to be like, and associating that with righteousness, the offering of righteousness, like we read in Malachi 3, 2 and 3. So now if we go to Luke 6 through 11, it says, in the course of another Sabbath, he entered into the synagogue and began teaching. There was a man present with his hand withered. Scribes and Pharisees were watching him closely to see whether he would cure on the Sabbath, find some way to accuse him. See, they're wicked. They're not righteous here. He, however, knowing the reasoning, said to the man with the withered hand, get up, stand in the center. And he rose and took his stand. Then Jesus said to them, I ask you, men, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do injury, to save or to destroy a soul? After looking around at them all, he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he did so, and his hand was restored. But they became filled with madness, and they began talking over with one another what they might do to Jesus. He's refining them here. He's clarifying them like gold and silver. And then if we go to John 7, we read part of this earlier. Let's read a little more of it, though, because here he's explicitly in the temple. He has come to the temple, just like Malachi said he would. Now, when the festival was half over, Jesus went up into the temple and began teaching. Therefore the Jews fell to wondering, saying, how does this man have a knowledge of letters when he has not studied at the schools? Jesus in turn answered and said, what I teach is not mine, but belongs to him that sent me. John cleared up the way for Jehovah, the God of the Messiah. And the Messiah came in the name of his God, the Father, the only God, not in his own name, or they would receive him, but in the name of the one he was prophesied to come in. The name that's not his name, unless he's given that name, to the glory of the only God, the Father. If anyone desires to do his will, he will know concerning the teaching whether it is from God or I speak of my own originality. Because I'm not the only God. I'm not Jehovah God. I've come in the name of that only God, and I'm not speaking my own words. I'm speaking the words of that only God. He that speaks of his own originality is seeking his own glory. He that seeks the glory of him, this one is true, and there is no unrighteousness in him. Moses gave you the law, did he not? Not one of you obeys the law. Why are you seeking to kill me? Clearly they need refining. They need purifying, just like Micah chapter 3 prophesied. The crowd answered, you have a demon. Who's seeking to kill you? In answer, Jesus said to them, one deed I performed, and you are all wondering? For this reason, Moses has given you the circumcision. Not that it's from Moses, but that it is from the forefathers. And you circumcise a man on a Sabbath. If a man receives circumcision on a Sabbath, in order that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you violently angry at me because I made a man completely sound in health on the Sabbath? Or on a Sabbath? Stop judging from the outward appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. The people will become an offering in righteousness when the Lord, the messenger of the covenant, comes to his temple. And then verses 28 through 8:11. Again, he's in the temple. Or he was in the temple, but he's in the public speaking and probably still in the temple. Because from verse 14, he's been speaking. He went up into the temple and began teaching. Verse 28, therefore Jesus cried out, as he was teaching in the temple. The Lord, messenger of the covenant, came to his temple, to God's temple, to the one who's speaking in Malachi 3:1's temple, which Jesus shows is not him in Matthew 11:10. You both know me and you know where I'm from. Also, I've not come on my own initiative, but he that sent me is real, and you do not know him. You do not know him, Trinitarians. He's the only God. He's Jehovah God. There are not three persons in one God. There is one God, the Father. Explicit word-for-word teaching, 1 Corinthians 8:6. The only God, in whose name Jesus came, not his own name, because that name is not his. It's given to him, not to his glory, but to the glory of the only God, the Father. I know him because I'm a representative from him, and that one sent me forth. Hence they began seeking to get hold of him. This is all in the temple, but no one laid a hand upon him because his hour had not come. Still many of the crowd put faith in him, offering people in righteousness. And they commenced saying, when the Christ arrives, he will not perform more signs than this man has performed, will he? The Pharisees heard the crowd murmuring these things about him, and the chief priests and the Pharisees dispatched officers to get a hold of him. They need to be purified. They need to be refined like gold and silver in a furnace. When the Lord, the messenger of the covenant, comes to his temple and does exactly this. Therefore, Jesus said, I continue a little while longer with you before I go to him that sent me. You will look for me, but you will not find me. And where I am, you cannot come. Therefore, the Jews said among themselves, where does this man intend going, so that we shall not find him? He does not intend to go to the Jews dispersed among the Greeks and teach the Greeks, does he? What does this saying mean that he said, you will look for me and not find me? And where I am, you cannot come. Now on the last day, the great day of the festival, Jesus was standing up, and he cried out, saying, if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. He that puts faith in me, just as the scripture has said, out of his innermost parts, streams of water will flow. Who is in him? Who's teaching through him? Who does Isaiah 54:13 say we will all be taught by? The Father, Jehovah God, whom Jesus identifies as the Father, the one teaching him because he's not teaching what he has been taught by the Father. However, verse 39, he said this concerning the Spirit, which those who put faith in him were about to receive, for as yet there was no Spirit because Jesus had not been glorified. And then they go on to identify him as the prophet, those in the crowd, as the one coming from the offspring of David. And then, of course, the Pharisees and scribes condemn the crowd, say, you've not been misled also, have you? Not one of the rulers of the Pharisees has put faith in him. The officers are saying this to the crowd. And then it goes on to show how Jesus continues to teach in righteousness. He continues to purify the people, to present them as an offering in righteousness. Verse 1, chapter 8, our last reading. Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At daybreak, however, he again presented himself at the temple. The Lord, the messenger of the covenant, will come to his temple, and he will purify the people. He will refine them like gold and silver to make them an offering in righteousness. And all the people began coming to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. Who's teaching them here? Is this Jesus teaching them? All your sons will be taught by Jehovah, Isaiah 54:13. John 7:15 through 18, what I teach is not mine. Verse 3, now the scribes and Pharisees brought a woman caught at adultery. And after standing her in their midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of committing adultery. In the law of Moses, it's prescribed for us to stone such a woman. What really do you say? Of course, they were saying this to put him to the test, in order to have something in which to accuse him. Jesus bent down and began to write with his finger in the ground. When they persisted in asking him, he straightened up and said to them, Let the one of you that is sinless be the first to throw a stone at her. And bending over again, he kept writing on the ground. Those who heard this began going out, one by one, starting with the older men, and he was left alone, and the woman that was in their midst. He purified them. He refined them right here in the temple by his teaching, which is not his teaching. It's the Father's teaching, the one God, the only God's teaching, in whose name, not his own name, he came, because he's standing and shepherding in the strength of Jehovah, his God. Micah 5:4. The one speaking in Malachi 3:1. The one whose way was prepared so that he could send forth his Son and speak and work through him, which is exactly what the Son says was done. But those who heard this began going out. We read that. Verse 10, straightening up, Jesus said to her, the woman that they wanted him to approve stoning, Woman, where are they? Did no one condemn you? Verse 11, she said, No one, sir. Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way. From now on, practice sin no more." He made her an offering in righteousness. Jesus fulfilled every single thing other than what John is said to have fulfilled to prepare the way for him to fulfill those things in the Father's name that Malachi 3, 1 through 3 spoke about the Lord, the messenger of the covenant, doing in the temple. Jesus fulfilled Malachi 3, 1 through 3, along with John the Baptist. John prepared the way of Jaho, speaking in Malachi 3, 1, whom Jesus distinguished from himself in Matthew 11, 10. And Jesus, as the only begotten God of John 1:18, came and told us about the one no one has seen, the Father, the only God. He did only what the Father taught him. And so we saw the Father, whom no one can see, in the person, in the teachings, in the actions of the Son, the one whom God made Lord, to his glory, the angel of the covenant.